Morning.
Morning.
So this Sunday, I don't know if you've noticed a trend that we have had in the readings for the last while. It started a while ago where we had Esther, and then it was followed by Ruth, and then we had the widows last week, and this week we have Hannah. The thing that we often miss, because the focus over so many years that the Bible tells the story of, we often think of David, we think of Jesus, we think of people who had position and authority, although Jesus came only as a carpenter. But we forget that. And we forget that the Bible is mostly about people who were at a disadvantage. That God uses the people that we don't expect God to use. That God changes the world not from the top up, but often from the bottom. And we miss that because we buy into this idea that now the church is accepted in society. Now, not as much in the last little while, but for a long time the church was considered if you want, the higher up in society. And people would go to church because you needed to be at church to be seen and to be important. And the church had power and position. But the Bible always talks about the people who didn't have power and position and how God uses those people to change their surroundings and the world around them. It's one of the things I find interesting is that a lot of the people often, and this is a little more political maybe than I should be, but they often say, oh, this group is woke and that group is woke. And well, the Bible's woke because the Bible is drawing attention to the people that others dismiss. The Bible is drawing attention to those who are persecuted and do not have the same advantages as others. And the Bible uses those people to change their surroundings. Hannah is again in this long list that has, with Esther and Ruth and with the widows and so many other women. But it's not just the women that God uses. God uses the people, the beggar, the person who can't see, the fisherman. God is always using those people that the rest of the world would overlook. Prisoners. God uses the areas where we, in our comfort, in our position, would say, what do they have to offer? So Hannah in many ways is blessed because she is married to a man who loves her. And she is loved, and that is a blessing no matter where we are in the world. But Hannah has a sense of who she wants to be, of a calling, and that is to be a mother. And Hannah has kind of committed this idea of who she wants to be, and she keeps coming to God over and over and over again. It says year after year, seeking the blessing of a child. And year after year after year, she is disappointed. And her husband tells her, look, as her husband should, he says, look, well, actually, he says it in kind of a weird way. The best way would have been to say, I love you no matter what. But instead, he kind of makes it more like, look, isn't my love worth more than 10 kids? He says, look, I should be enough for you. My love for you should be all that you need in this world, which his intent probably was good, but the message kind of, again, comes across a little strange. And he can't figure out why she's sad when he loves her. And to make matters worse, he, in those days, there were more than one wife, and the other wife despises Hannah. Now, it could be because the husband loves Hannah more and gives her a double portion, or it could be that she is just a spiteful person, which is why the husband loves Hannah more. Don't know quite the order of things there, but she sees the desire and the longing that Hannah has to have a child, and the other wife has many sons and daughters, and she uses that to cause pain for Hannah. She constantly brings it up. She basically mocks and ridicules Hannah that her womb is closed. And we are talking about a time when that would have been very, very important to a person. And for Hannah, it was more than just the idea of, I need to be useful. This was her dream. And so when you have a difficulty, when there is something in your life that is not going the way that you want it to, it is hard. But that doesn't mean it can't be made harder by having someone mock and ridicule you about it. We often make the statement, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Except we know that words hurt. Words cut often deeper than stones. And so Hannah is being told by her husband, look, don't worry about it. I'm enough. She's being mocked and ridiculed by her, I don't know, what would you call your fellow wife? Is there like a... Anyways, she's being mocked and ridiculed, and God does not seem to be listening to her. She goes again and again and again to God, and God does not seem to hear. And so they're back at the temple, and this would have been sort of a maybe bi-yearly, but mostly a yearly visit to the tabernacle, where Eli is the priest. Remember, at that time, they don't have a set temple, but they have the tabernacle that kind of with the altar of God. And so most of the people would make a pilgrimage to the tabernacle, make their sacrifices that they needed to make according to the law of Moses. And that would be a big event. And so they've come to make their sacrifices. They've come to do what is required. And every time when this happens, Hannah comes to God and prays for a child. And every time when this happens, her fellow wife mocks and ridicules her. And every time this happens, her husband says, I'm enough. I'm enough. You don't need anything else. And so all of these emotions, all of this pressure is sitting on Hannah, and she comes to the tabernacle to pray. And then to make matters worse, she's praying quietly, but she's distressed. And she's emotional, and she is praying, and it's moving through her, and her lips are moving. And then to make everything worse, Eli sees her and tells her, like, look, woman, if you're going to be drunk, go somewhere else. Don't do this in God's house. And so now, along with her husband telling her, look, I'm enough, her fellow wife telling her, basically, you're a loser, and with God not listening to her, now the priest also says to her, you're drunk, you shouldn't be here. And through all of this resistance, through all of this pushback, Hannah keeps coming. And she says to Eli, look, I'm not drunk, I'm just distressed. And I'm praying to God because this is my burden. And Eli's sons turn out not to be all that great. But Eli is a good man. He's the one who plays an important role. And maybe he feels bad because, he called her a drunk when she isn't drunk. Or maybe he's just compassionate, but he tells her, go. God will hear your petition. And she leaves, and right away, her spirit is lifted up. And it's not that her husband has changed. It's not that her fellow wife has changed. It's that for now she has felt that God has heard her. And that gives her a sense of peace and joy she did not have before. Because no matter what, now she knows that her prayer has been heard by God. And she goes back, and lo and behold, she conceives a son. And that son's name is Samuel. And Samuel, as you may have guessed from this reading coming from 1 Samuel, is perhaps the most famous judge that there was in the Old Testament. During the time of judges, many came and went, but Samuel's the only one that, he gets 2 whole books named after him. The other ones are all just crammed into the book of Judges, but Samuel has 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and Samuel will bridge the gap between the judges and the kings. And Samuel will be remembered as a faithful and compassionate man. But he'll also be remembered by Hannah as a gift from God. And every year when the family would go back, so she had made a promise to God that if she had a son, she would devote this son to God, a Nazarite. Basically someone who was committed to serving God their life. And they would not drink wine or any sort of alcohol, and they would not cut their hair. We've tried to turn Ian into one of those, but he did get a haircut recently. But this would be a person that was dedicated to God. And so Hannah every year would come, because when he was 3 years old, she gave her son Samuel basically to Eli and said, raise him in the tabernacle. And every year when she would come to see him, it was a big deal. And every year she made him a coat, and he'd get a new coat, and she would be there present with him. After, Hannah would have, I think, 3 more sons and 2 more daughters, and God would continue to bless her. And Samuel would grow up to be a judge. But the thing that I take away from this story is that even when Hannah was not feeling like she was heard by God, even in the midst of mockery and ridicule, even in the midst of people kind of dismissing what she wanted, she was persistent in her faith to go to God. She was persistent in that she kept going even in the face of despair and failure. Her faith, though battered and beaten, was not broken. And she kept going back to God. And I like the fact that in the story, she is relieved, not after she has a son, but as soon as she knows that God has heard her. We often think of faith as believe and receive. The idea that, if we believe, then God will give it to us and all will be well. If we pray, but life usually kind of wipes that out from us when we believe and we do not receive. When we believe and it does not happen, and we maybe like Hannah will start to feel like God does not hear our voice or our prayers. But like Hannah, we need to remember that we are heard even when we don't notice it, even when we can't see the evidence. And like Hannah, we are reminded that faith is not something that is simply given to us when everything is going well. We don't believe when everything happens the way we think it should. We believe even when in difficult times. In fact, that is when our faith becomes most precious to us. Because it reminds us that even in the difficulty, even when the world's not going the way it's supposed to, still God walks with us. And though we might not always notice the difference, our faith tells us still we are heard. Still God is present. Still God is there for us. The passage that Pam, I think it was our prayer of invocation, it's from Romans 8, that still, no matter that there is nothing in this life or in the life or death that can separate us from the love and presence of God through Jesus Christ. We need to remember that faith is not weak, that faith is not brittle, that faith is not seasonal, but that faith perseveres, that faith is stronger than what the world can throw at us. There is an invitation in this story for us to continue to use the gifts that God has given us and to not lose heart even when it looks like the world is falling around all over the place. The other part I find interesting in this story too is that she goes to God and she's asking. But at a certain point she goes to God and she asks for a son. And then even before she's received the son, she goes, I'm praying for a son, but I also give this son back to you. And that idea that when we pray and we ask, if we're only asking for ourselves, but when we are asking, let us ask for something that will not only be for us, but for the world around us. Hannah asks for a son, not just so that she can have a son, but so that her son can continue to be a servant of God. And it's that sense of, they often talked about the foxhole prayers where people would pray to God and they say, God, if you get me through this, I will do this. And God, if I make this, if I am alive at the end, I will do this. And they say a lot of those prayers after they made it were kind of like, well, they didn't follow through. But a lot of people did follow through. And it's important for us to remember that as we are given gifts, as we are blessed, as we receive, the understanding that when we receive a gift from God is that it is a gift that we receive and then share with others. That if we're only receiving for our benefit, then perhaps we do not fully understand what God is doing. But when you are gifted by God, it is a gift that we are called to share, to cherish it, and then to share it, because that is how the gifts of God works. Miss Wells was an English teacher, and she loved teaching English. She loved literature. She loved the stories. She loved the classics. She loved the new books. She loved teaching English in the school. And even when people would struggle, she had patience and time with them. English gave her that sense of being and purpose. What did not give her a sense of being and purpose were sports. She didn't really understand why people got so wrapped up in sports. She didn't see the value of it. But unfortunately for her, she was working at a school where every single teacher was required to teach or also to coach a sport. And when she got there and they told her that, she said, well, fine, I would like to coach badminton, because she liked badminton. And she had played on badminton. But unfortunately, Mr. Rogers, who almost made it onto the Canadian badminton team, or so he claimed, was the badminton coach and held on to that title no matter what would happen. And so instead they gave Miss Wells the soccer team, the girls' soccer team, which was famous or infamous in the school, because for 5 years before Miss Wells had got there, they had never won a game. For 5 years. 6 years before that, they had won 1 game. And every year they played 9 games. There was 10 teams in the league and they played 9 games. 6 years ago, they had won 1. The last 5, they had not won any. And so when Miss Wells took over, she as a good, she enjoyed studying everything. She studied soccer. She read the tactics. She read all of these things, the practices. And her first year, they continued that streak. So it was 6 years now that they had not won. And her 7th year, not only did they not win any games throughout the whole season, they only scored 4 goals the whole season. And now her 3rd year, she was at the end of the season. It was their last game of the season. They had scored 2 goals all season. And they had obviously not won any games. And they didn't just lose, like in soccer, you might lose 2 to nothing, or 2-1, or 3-1 in a real blowout. No, they lost 4-0, 5-0. Their worst game was when they lost 8-0, and that team finally just kind of had mercy on them. And so this was her last game, and there was a sense of relief that the season was over, because she felt terrible for her players. Every time they would come to practice, they would go out to their games, and they would lose. And she felt like she was failing them. And so she would try so hard to lift up their spirits and to tell them that the soccer, the score did not matter. What mattered was what they brought and what they gained. And she cared about these girls. And so on the last game of the season, she understood why all of the grade 12s said they had a graduation thing that they had to go to, a planning meeting, that she knew that they had planned on that day on purpose. And so all the grade 12s and all the grade 11s seemed to have found something not to be there. So all she had was her grade 10, her rookies, and her one grade 12 student that she felt terrible for. And her name was Ellie. And Ellie had started with her as a coach. And so she was the only coach that Ellie had ever known. And Ellie had only seen disappointment and despair. But Ellie loved soccer. Like this, as much as Miss Wells loved English, Ellie loved soccer. And she practiced and she played. And she was by far the best player. In fact, she was the only player that had any goals for the team the last 2 years. And she was really good. And the rest of the team would know that. And so they'd key on her and surround her. And the rest of the team would just flounder. And Miss Wells felt terrible for Ellie, that she was constantly playing on this team that got nowhere, and she felt like she had just failed her. And yet while none of the grade 11s or 12s came, Ellie came, And that last game, and Miss Wells went to the coach of the other team and said, look, all my grade 12s and my 11s except one are gone. Is there any chance that, you might have play your grade 10s or something like that? And the other coach laughed and said, no, we're in third place. If we beat you by a certain margin of goals, we get second place, and then we get to host a playoff game. No, we're going to beat you, and we're going to beat you badly. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. And Miss Wells' team heard this. All these grade 10s heard this. And they were like, and they went out there and they started, and sure enough, in the first 5 minutes, it was 2-0 for the other team. And one of the players went by and said, 8-0's the record. We're going for 9-0. And the team just kind of went, and then Ellie, as the captain of the team, called all of the players together. Not Miss Wells, but on the pitch where she couldn't go. And she called a brief huddle. And they came out of that huddle, and Miss Wells was surprised because these grade 10s, which before this were wide-eyed and terrified, looked grim and determined. And the game started to change. And Ellie took the ball and she was shooting down the side, and the whole team kind of just swarmed towards her. And just as they almost got to her, she kicked it off to Amy. And Amy, who was grade 10 and was playing for the first time, evidently had an incredible leg because she burnt that soccer ball right past the goalie and into the back. And Miss Wells starts jumping up and yelling because this was the third goal of the season, and it was by this young girl in grade 10, and she was just so happy. But her team on the pitch, because her whole team was on the pitch because she had no reserves, they all just kind of nodded, patted her on the back, and went back. There was a sense of determination she had never seen in them. And the second time, again, Ellie was shooting down and she passes it to Amy, only this time the other team was ready, and they got towards Amy, and Amy knocked it back to Ellen, who banged it in as well. Obviously, these grade 10s knew how to play. And it was 2-0. And the other team was kind of surprised because they needed a certain goal advantage to become second place. And they thought, okay, fine. And they hunkered down. And the second half was a back and forth. And Miss Wells was amazed when they pulled ahead for the very first time in 7 years when Ellie scored her first goal of the game, the 3-2. The game ended up 4-2 because they got one goal in at the last minute of play when the other team was just desperate and trying to score. And it was the first time the team had not only won in 8 years, it was the first time since before they were keeping scores on stones and tablets, they actually won by more than one goal. And the team, as they scored that last goal, she thought, again, they'd been so determined. They again patted each other, they lined up, and when the whistle blew, they again had that sense of determination, and then they jumped for joy. These grade 10s and the one grade 12, they jumped and they yelled and they screamed, and they came and they just gave Miss Wells the huge hug. Miss Wells was crying and they were crying and everyone was emotional, and Miss Wells said, what? Because she knew that something had happened when Ellie had talked to the team. She goes, what did you say to the team? What did you tell them that, this was it, that this was your last game and that they should win for you? Ellie goes, no, of course not. She goes, what I told them is that for 3 years, you had been my coach. For 3 years, you had seen us lose game after game after game. Yet you came to every single practice with a smile on your face and encouragement. Every time we lost, you made us feel like we were not disappointments or failures, but that we were special and that you cared about us. Every single game, you were there and you supported us. When it was cold, you bought us hot chocolates. When it was hot, you bought us milkshakes. And on a teacher's salary with just you, I don't know what that was costing, but every time you thought about us. I want to continue to play, and I hope that I will get better as I go, but there will never be a better coach for me than you. Because you taught me that the most important thing isn't the goals or the winning, but is about caring for your players and your fellow teammates. What I told them is that this was my last chance to win a game for you. Because you might not realize what a difference you've made. But day in, day out, practice after practice, 3 years of it, you are the best coach I could ever want. Ellie did go on to play for the Canadian Olympics team, and Miss Wells' team 2 years, when those grade 10s were grade 12s, actually won the league. But for Miss Wells, the thing that changed her always after that, because she was a soccer coach for years and years, the words of Ellie, to remind her that it wasn't the scores or the goals, it was the compassion and caring day in, day out that mattered. Our faith is to be a faith of persistence. Our faith is to be a faith of endurance. That we constantly are out there, even when we don't want to, even when it doesn't seem to be working, even when we are facing failure, that we continue to give the love and grace and compassion of God to the world and the people around us, including ourselves. Do not listen to the people that tell you, don't worry, just let it go, it doesn't matter. Don't listen to the people that mock and ridicule you and tell you, you have failed and you will never succeed. Don't listen to the people that tell you you shouldn't be here and that you are a disgrace. Instead, listen to the call of God. Listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit that tells you that you are a blessing in this world. And if you do not see it and if you do not feel it, have the faith to continue to be the person that others see Christ in. To be that solid, steady presence that loves, cares, and has compassion for the people around you. Because we are blessed. But for us to truly receive our blessing, we are called to bless the people around us, no matter how hard or no matter how sometimes worthless it feels. Do not lose faith, but persevere.